Hello and welcome to another episode of the Minor Issues Podcast. I'm Mark Thornton at the Mises Institute. We have a very special episode this week for you, but before I get to that, I want to tell you that the Institute is starting its fall campaign. And there's a link in the description for you to donate to the Institute's campaign. And I wanted to tell you about a secret offer that I'm making. If you use the link to the Minor Issues podcast, I'm going to send you a free copy of a relatively new book called Free Trade in the 21st Century. And it's a collection of essays by scholars from all over the world and even some politicians involved in the international trade issue. But this is the signature issue of this time, and I'm going to send you a copy of this book. It contains not just my essay, but several essays by scholars affiliated with the Mises Institute, several of our friends, and fellow travelers to Austrian economics. So it's really an exciting book about the signature issue of this time. And I'm going to sign it, and who knows, maybe you'll be able to find other people other contributors to sign it and make it a collectible item at some point in time. So in any case, I hope you can support the Mises Institute and its work going forward. It's absolutely vital. It makes this podcast possible. So in this week's episode, it's really going to be based on last week's episode of the Minor Issues podcast. And it's my appearance and interview on the Liberty and Finance show, where they had an opportunity to ask me follow-up questions related to last week's episode. Allowed me to elaborate on a lot of my answers and to ask follow-up questions. And I know a lot of you would like to have an opportunity to do that. You write me questions and you put comment questions in all the time. So this is a chance to see. It's actually, for the Liberty and Finance show, they actually kept me on for twice the length of one of their normal shows. So it's quite lengthy and in-depth. And on the YouTube version of it, the comments were, I was very grateful. The comments were extremely complimentary to the host and to me. And they were very pro Mises Institute people and commenters on there. So I would encourage you to watch this episode whenever you have time, because this is not an 8 to 10 minute episode. This is nearly an hour long. And of course, share it with your friends who might be interested and share it with social media. So without further ado, here is this week's episode.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. I am privileged to welcome a returning guest who hasn't been on our channel for far too long. Mark Thornton is from the Mises Institute. He joins us today as Friday, September 12th, 2025. Mark, thank you for coming back on Liberty and Finance.
Dunagun, it's a pleasure to be with you.
You have been interviewed in the past by my son, Elijah. It's all his fault that I got into the podcasting business in the first place back in 2013 because as a homeschooler, he had the audacity to ask such questions as not just why is the sky blue, but where does money come from? And where does it get its value? And who gets the right to create it? And then who do they give it to? And how is this all fair? And I said, as most homeschool fathers might do, that's a great question. Why don't you do a research report on it, and we'll talk about it by reviewing your work. And he came back to me deeply troubled. About a week later, said, Dad, I'm stopping halfway through because if what I am learning is true, something is very wrong, and I've got to start a podcast to let people know about this because people don't know this and they've got to know. So that's how he got into it, and that's how I got into it. So thank you as being the Mises Institute as part of that whole story, because they've been a wealth of information for people on the truth about reality of money and things that call themselves money but are not, and what people do when they're confronted with the reality, when they finally wake up, and what they should do sooner if they want to protect themselves from the hard knocks they're going to experience if they don't. So this is all greatly appreciated by our audience, and thank you for being here. You recently published a video presentation where you talked about how we are on the on-ramp to hyperinflation, and you explained very concrete steps that have happened throughout history when nations have gone down the road to hyperinflation, and the three main steps that occur and what the signs and signals are that people need to watch out for, because we get a lot of people calling us or writing us and saying, well, how long till the monetary reset? How long till the collapse? You guys have been talking about this forever. You've got a way of putting very pragmatic, reasonable, structured thinking to that. Very helpful, eye-opening. We'd love to talk about that. Also, you're recently written about the gold-silver ratio. That's been a fascinating interest to our audience as well. And finally, your most recent article just about to come out about black swans. Would love to hear more about that. So could you start us off with the on-ramp to hyperinflation and the steps that happen typically when that is occurring and where we are at currently in that process?
Yes, Dunagun. The two main ingredients to hyperinflation is a massive government debt, which is symbolized by the color red, and, of course, the ability to just print up money without any cost of production, which, of course, that's paper money. And in the United States, we have green paper money. And I noted on my talk that if you add the color red to the color green, you get the color brown. And I think that's very descriptive of the general direction of where we're going here. We have a massive debt. We have a massive interest payments on the government debt. That has exploded in recent years. We're borrowing trillions of dollars of additional money. We're spending beyond our means in terms of the federal government in the trillions of dollars. And, that has to be reversed, or we continue on this road to hyperinflation. And the namesake of the Mises Institute, Ludwig von Mises, on observing the German hyperinflation, he said there's 3 stages. And in the first stage, where the government is creating more money, but the people are used to the money being of a real tangible value, gold and silver, and so they'll accept the additional money that's being put into the economy. And when they increase their demand for money, it means that there's almost no effect on price inflation and the money doesn't depreciate. But
and just so we can clarify, when you say people increase their demand for money, for example, wanting to put it into a savings account or that sort of thing, and take it on and absorb that inflation of the monetary supply.
Yes, in your wallet, in your purse, in your checking account, in your savings account,
or perhaps foreign holders of the U.S. debt as well, or the other country's debt as well.
Yeah, but it's basically just the money itself. And then eventually, if the government thinks it can get away with this, they will continue to increase the supply of money, but then people will start reacting in stage 2. They'll no longer increase their demand to hold money. They won't add to their checking accounts. They won't add to their savings accounts. They'll spend more. And so they speed up the money in the economy and prices start to rise. And as this process goes on into stage 3, where the government is continuing to increase the supply of money, but then in stage 3, people decrease their demand for money. So they're no longer adding to their accounts. They're actually reducing their checking and savings accounts. They're actually reducing their cash balances. They're spending more. And as a result, price inflation actually picks up. So the rate of higher prices increases. And this is when you enter stage 3, this is the very early stage of the road to hyperinflation. And it's of course, the massive amount of debt that accumulates in stage 1 and in stage 2. This could take just a couple of years, as in the case of Germany, or it may take place over a long period of time. But the commonality is the inability of the government to finance itself with taxes. And so as a result, they're borrowing more, and then as a result, they're printing more, and you get into a position where they are forced essentially to continue to print up more money, but people don't want to hold the money because they realize now they have new expectations with respect to the money. They're no longer willing to hold it. They want to spend it. And in doing so, they increase the prices of whatever they're spending it on. And of course, this process, as you know, most people have very little understanding of what causes inflation or how much inflation they're actually experiencing, how bad they're actually being made worse off. And in the whole overall process, some people are first movers. They realize it early on, and they try to protect themselves. They try to protect themselves knowing that the government's going to continue to print, and so they want to get out of dollar bills in anything that's denominated in dollar bills, and they want to move into real assets. And some of the things I mentioned that we actually see today is people moving into more real estate. The price of real estate is very high now. The price of land is very high right now because people have been parking a lot of their money in extra housing, extra real estate, and extra land. And so that's one category. Another category, of course, you know all too well, and that is people deciding to exchange their fiat paper dollars for gold and silver coins, gold and silver bars, things of that nature. So, and then, of course, as that continues on, the price of gold and the price of silver starts rising. And as people lose trust in their government, and then they lose trust in their currency, they want to exchange more of that currency for gold and silver coins. And so younger people in this whole process, they've been sort of forced out of the real estate market because of the high prices. They see gold and silver as sort of an antique phenomenon, and what they see is cryptocurrency and Bitcoin is something that's modern, it's cool, it's based on the gold standard. I mean, you have to expend resources to create cryptocurrency. It gets more and more difficult to create cryptocurrency. So in some sense, it's mocking the gold mining industry. In fact, they call it mining for Bitcoin or mining for crypto. And so they see that as the modern, cool, hip way to get out of U.S. paper money and into something that can go up in value over time. And of course, it has gone up in value over time. I remember when Bitcoin first came out, a single Bitcoin only cost $10. And it's been, there's more and more Bitcoin out there, but the price has risen to over $100,000. So that's the general phenomenon. And we are certainly, and I think if you take the real estate, you take the gold, silver stackers, gold stackers, and you take the people interested in crypto and accumulating crypto, that's still a minority of the overall population. Most people have no idea of what's happening to them. They have no idea what's going on right now in the world of monetary affairs. And we are in a period of monetary chaos right now. where there's no legitimate standard of monetary economics in the world. And the reserve currency of the world is now begun to be in doubt. And so, not surprisingly, gold and silver prices have moved very, very high. And gold is at an all-time, record. And as I said before, real estate, housing, land prices, they're all up. Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are all up. Stocks are even at all-time record highs too. So people are learning day by day. More and more people are coming to realize that they're being taken advantage of by their own government and the Federal Reserve, debasing the money, resulting in higher prices, resulting in impoverishment, resulting in a distribution of income away from the working class towards the wealthy Wall Street class, who's in control of the stock market. And, and then eventually, of course, we're going to see the boom-bust cycle emerge where everybody's hurt as a result.
There's several things. This description you make sounds very realistic. It sounds very descriptive of what we're in the middle of right now. Several things jumped out to me as you went through that. One was that in addition to the psychological awakening, the psychological awareness on ordinary people's part that their unjustified or undeserved trust in the stability of the value preservation capacity of what's called money in the culture, once it changes into being unbacked currency, is eroded. Their trust in that. They start to awaken to this idea that, wait a minute, unlike everything that I thought was instinctively and naturally and common sense fairness about that once you earn and you save that it stays there and it's stable. No, this is being stolen from through the corrosive effect of inflation. That then they run out of enchantment with that, and they want to divest themselves of this devaluing thing and get into something that holds its value. But the part that the little light bulb went on for me just now when you were describing that, and that is that with the acceleration of money velocity in your second stage there and the acceleration of prices, hard times come to people. People are really getting pinched. Retirees, like in the 55 plus community where we live, who thought they were soundly in retirement are now being told by their personal financial advisors, yeah, you better cut expenses or go back to work because your plan isn't working out quite right anymore. And young people you mentioned can't afford a house. So you have all these subgroups of our culture that are all finding that hard times are upon them, this impoverishment that you described. So even their ability to be able to stockpile more cash if they wanted to, they can't. They're having to dip into their cash savings or checking accounts or whatever to pay the bills just to carry on their life. So we're seeing that even in the bullion broker business is that we get more and more calls for people selling than we used to, and fewer calls for people buying. And they say they wish they could afford it, but they just can't right now because times are so tough. They have to liquidate to pay their taxes. They have to liquidate because of medical expenses. They have to liquidate because they're going to have to move or various needs. Or they're trying to help younger generation to afford to buy their starter home, that kind of thing. Any further thoughts from you on this combination of confluence of factors that it's beyond just the psychological awareness and the awakening that that's a depleting resource, but rather also at the same time just being impoverished to the point where they're no longer able to save. They're actually having to spend out their savings, just as the debting country has been racking up trillion-dollar deficits as you described.
Yes, if you haven't been stacking gold and silver, you might have a very large stock portfolio, and stock prices have so far continued to rise. And so you can feel good about that aspect of your life. And I think that a lot of people realize when they go to the grocery store, especially, and when they see their auto insurance, their homeowner's insurance, they can tell that the bills have gone up. In the past, with inflation in the United States, your auto insurance and your house insurance and your property tax were always going up, but by a very small percentage. And you'd have to actually go back and look at your checkbook or your account to tell how much it had gone up. But now that those bills are going up significantly, and those people are not making it up. I mean, your auto insurance bill is going up because it costs more. If your car is in a collision or something, it's going to cost a lot more money to get the new parts and to pay the labor and everything else associated with that. If your house burns down, the raw materials and the labor to make it good, all of that's gone up significantly. So these companies are not just making these bills up. The electric company is not making the fact that electricity is going up in price rapidly. In many cases, they're not even producing it. They're buying it from somebody else. So, all of these things are very, very real. And when I look at all the government statistics and all the private statistics, and I look at the distribution of wealth and income in the United States, I see probably more than one half, maybe as high as 2/3 of the population who has experienced significant impoverishment since the COVID affair and the massive increase in the money supply that the Federal Reserve unleashed on the American population that was associated with that breakout of the COVID flu. And, trillions and trillions of dollars that greatly expanded the federal budget. And, our politicians, our so-called representatives, have never done anything to cut back the budgets after COVID. So they just continue on spending everything that they spent during the emergency, and then, of course, their regular 5 to 10 to 15% increase on everything. And so, that's just what they do. And normally, if it's just on trend, we have a hard time judging it. And this is the same thing that Mises was saying about the stages 1 and stages 2. If the inflation is low and the inflation is steady, we don't really pay much attention to it. We don't react to it. We just do the same thing over and over again, which is perfectly reasonable and rational. I mean, that's the way humans are. And it takes a while for us to catch on to what the government is up to and what those people at the Federal Reserve, what they're actually up to. They don't seem to care at all about the American middle class, the working class. They'll talk about their dual mandate about labor and inflation, but that's not it at all. There are two mandates. The true mandates are to finance the government debt. Okay, that's the big thing that they're into, is to finance the government debt. That's what they do. They buy government bonds. That's what their job is. So that's one of their mandates, is to help manage the government debt. And the other is to bail out Wall Street, to bail out the stock market, to keep interest rates low so stocks go up in value. And then when the stock market crashes or the banks get in trouble, the Fed comes in and bails out the banks, the big banks who work for the Fed, and the stock market, which is where they get their people from. Jay Powell was from, Wall Street. So that's how it works. So when they talk about, the dual mandate is making sure inflation is under control and making sure everybody gets a job, that is a total BS story.
Oh gosh, there's so much. Everything you're saying, it just triggers reality with interviews we've had. We talked with Dr. Judy Shelton, who was part of the Trump first administration. She talked about Bernanke and others behind doors with Greenspan, and talking about this admission that the maintaining of stable prices, they said, why don't we look at that as actually maintaining a stable rate of inflation, because that's what people, and I think it was Yellen who said that makes people actually feel better, to know that the numbers on their checking paycheck are going up, or that sort of thing, or their statements. So that idea that people actually appreciate it when you see that they see the numbers get bigger. So we should keep debasing the currency out of our consideration for the common man, rather than holding to the value of the currency steady. There's so many aspects of that. In your article recently, you also talked about geopolitical chaos, tariffs and sanctions, and other reasons besides simply this drunken sailor debting and debasement of the currency, why there's a mass pivot away from trust and faith in the dollar or the U.S. Treasury. Can you underscore that so people understand there's more going on here than just impoverishment through debasement?
Yes, this is all tied together, really. It's monetary chaos, but this is also a very militant, aggressive world that we live in right now. And things like tariffs and sanctions, these are aggressive moves on the part of one government against another government. And we're, of course, big players in this. We're the number one country in terms of sanctions. And now we've dropped our free trade, our relatively free trade heritage, in favor of just personal vendetta type tariffs. And of course, also one of the things that kicked off this period of monetary chaos and the subsequent big increase in gold and silver prices was when we sanctioned the Russians, and we, in essence, took their U.S. holdings of Treasuries, their reserves of their central bank. We just took them as part of our sanctions of Russia. And it whatever, we can't really get into what happens before that, but this is just an ongoing escalation that's very much of military in its nature, and tariffs and sanctions are really just the first steps. And this is very unfortunate. This is very concerning. And of course, this is why other central banks have lost faith in the U.S. dollar. They've lost faith in U.S. government bonds. So certainly we should not have any faith in the U.S. dollar and U.S. government bonds, even if other central banks now have lost faith in it. And of course, just recently, as you know, gold has become the number one reserve asset on the balance sheets of central banks. So the central banks around the world are dropping U.S. Treasuries, long-term, medium-term government bonds and debt in favor of holding gold. And, I can't blame them. It makes perfect sense. I mean, gold was always, the number one asset, international reserve asset for both the private sector and the public sector. And, central banks realize that the trusting system of Bretton Woods and the subsequent dollar denomination, where we more or less played fair with other countries, is over. And so they've taken to replacing the dollar assets on their balance sheets with gold. And that's a big reason why gold has gone up in value, because central banks have been big purchasers. But certainly I think that if central banks don't trust the U.S. dollar and they're getting out of the U.S. dollar, I think that's really good evidence that everybody should wake up and do the same thing.
It's often illuminating for the little guy to see what the big money are doing and not listen to what they say, not listen to all the spin that goes on, all of the misdirection that says, we're doing this for the good of the people. Janet Yellen saying, yeah, people would prefer this or whatever. Just look what they're doing. Another thing that they're doing, if you say they, those are the highest parts of the food chain as insiders, the CEOs of even the Magnificent Seven corporations that have been the high flyers, the darlings of Wall Street for the past couple of years, are selling at a ratio of 7 to 1 overbuying in the market as we see it today. Any comments on that before we turn our attention to the gold-silver ratio?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the Magnificent Seven is toast. I think that, that it's very soon that whole thing is going to roll over. The seven magnificent stocks are no longer all that magnificent. And they talk about record-setting days on the stock market, but they're really only marginal increases. And I think you're right. We need to focus in on the fact that the wealthy and the big players are not only turning to gold, but now they're turning to silver with gold prices up so high. The Russians and the Saudis, the big players, big investors are getting out of the stock market and moving into things like physical silver. And so I really regret it, the fact that so many of the little guys are being forced into selling their silver stacks at this time. They see it as, well, they've made a lot of money and they've got to pay their taxes, or they got to pay the insurance bill, or they've got a medical bill. That's very, very regrettable. They're getting squeezed. But, these big players, they are definitely, if we can follow their actions, I think that what they're telling us is that they're getting out of the stock market. They're getting into hard assets, particularly gold and silver, just like foreign central banks. And they're getting out of the U.S. dollar. The dollar is falling precipitously this year. Investors in Europe and Asia are getting very worried about their investments in the United States, because even though they're nominally going up in value, the value of the U.S. dollar is down, I think, 10%. So that when they translate those gains back into Europe and stuff, they realize that they haven't gained anything in terms of their local currency, and the other currencies are not in much better shape. I mean, the Japanese are in chaos, the British are teetering on disaster, the French are all locked up. So we're not the only basket case in town. This is something that's going on around the world, and many of the major countries in the world, especially the allies of the United States, are in serious trouble. Germany is trying to print its way out of a deep, dark recessionary period. So, things are the real economy is showing the adverse effects of this constant inflation and debt. And when the real economy contracts, when you see stagflation, or when you see a recession or a stock market crash, and the economy is not able to produce as much, it can't employ as much labor because there's not enough savings left in the economy, then there's not enough money for payroll, there's not enough money for investment, and the economy produces fewer goods, and it doesn't matter what the government does to hand out stuff to people, we're just not going to be producing very much, and everybody's going to feel that pain.
One of the things you mentioned there was the awakening that happens when your activities or assets look valuable when priced in U.S. dollars, these declining U.S. dollars. But then when you convert back into real things, you realize how impoverished you are. That awakening has not been missed on the part of international holders of either U.S. Treasuries or U.S. dollars, and they're divesting, as you have said in your talk recently, the two curves of what percent of international holdings are in U.S. Treasuries has been declining. The amount of foreign holding of central banks in gold has been increasing, and we just hit a crossover point. Do you want to touch on that before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that central banks don't trust other central banks, and they want to be more independent and less dependent on each other, I think is very, very significant. It's probably, a smart move. It's probably a good move that individual central banks are actually have more gold on their balance sheet. But it's a very bad sign. It's a sign that the existing system is breaking down, It's all based on trust and confidence. It's all based on that trust and confidence. Trust in the dollar, confidence in the dollar, and the dollar has fallen significantly. And everybody, the big investors who, that their wealth is dependent upon that, they see the big fall we've seen in the dollar index this year. And the dollar index is just a relative measure versus the other currencies. And the other currencies are falling in terms of their purchasing power. So there's a mad scramble. And chaos has not, broken out. It's not at a riotous stage at this point because not a lot of people have caught on to the problem. And most people have not caught on to the real solution.
We've been interested in talking with you briefly. I know we're running long on time, but about your observations about the gold-silver ratio. You talked about that when you appeared on our channel a long time ago with my son, Elijah. Can you update us on your latest observations about the gold-silver ratio and why people should pay attention?
Yeah, I did an experiment back in May, I think it was. The gold-silver ratio was really in very high-level territories. It was more than 100 ounces of silver to equal 1 ounce of gold. And so I went through the motions of making that exchange where I took 1 ounce of gold, I traded it in, and then purchased 100 ounces of silver. And you think, well, what's the difference? Why bother with that? Well, I felt that we were very much in a stage where the metal prices were both going up, and that because the gold-silver ratio was at historic high levels, that ratio was going to fall, and it has fallen. I think I started it was like 104 to 1, and it's now somewhere like 86 to 1 over a 3-month period. Now, of course, both of the metals have increased, but it means that silver has increased relative to the increase in the price of gold. So if you do the accounting on it, it would be like I took 1 ounce of gold, I got 100 ounces of silver, and my 100 ounces of silver cover the increase in the price of gold, plus I have the equivalent of 14 extra ounces of silver. So it was a good move, and some of that's based on luck or interpretation of the market. But we were at extremely high levels. It's anything over 100 is historically high, and it's fallen down into the mid to upper 80s at this point. And I expect it to continue to fall. If this policy agenda by the Fed and other central banks continues, I expect that ratio to fall, for both metals to continue to rise unevenly over time, and for the silver to increase in relative value over time. And of course, I don't know how far that's going to go. I mean, Washington could fix this situation. They could cut spending dramatically. They could stop the printing presses. They could stop paying public employees and cut back on their payments to Social Security benefits and so forth, cut the military. I don't think they're going to do that, but eventually this is going to get very, very serious. And if we do get into hyperinflation, I mean, you could see the gold-silver ratio falling down to like 20. I don't think that's going to happen. I hope that's not going to happen. But there's a long ways to go from where we are right now to plausibly what probably is going to happen.
Help us connect the dots there in your thought process. Why would hyperinflation tend to correlate with a falling gold-silver ratio?
Well, because silver is going to rise in relative importance. The central banks would probably become less of accumulators and maybe even have to disperse their gold to somehow soften the brunt of inflation, whereas silver is a monetary metal that's actually used in commerce. So I would anticipate that when we get into a hyperinflation, that people actually start using silver to make certain types of purchases. Now, you won't be able to pay your electric bill with silver, but there are probably a lot of things that you will be able to pay with the use of silver. If you're actively trying to pay with silver, you're starting to find people who are interested in receiving silver rather than dollars because they don't have any access. They don't really know. They don't watch the show, man. So we need to get more people aware of all this so that they can help themselves. But I've noticed that, people are very appreciative to get silver tips, and other people are appreciative of being paid in silver. So, and that's with a 3% supposed rate of inflation. You can imagine if the government's measure was 10 or 15%. Hyperinflation is actually technically known as, anywhere from 20 to 50% price inflation per month as measured by the government's statistics. So we have a long ways to go till we get to an official hyperinflation. And that's why I say that we're only on the on-ramp to the road for hyperinflation. And there's every good indication that rationally we could stop the printing presses, rationally we could slash the budget and stop this problem in its tracks. I just don't think that's going to happen. I think the political class is super, super arrogant. I don't think that they show any appreciation for the people they're supposedly representing. I don't think they really care about the rank and file citizenry of this country or any country. I think they're in it for themselves, the people at the Fed, the people in Congress. I don't think we can depend on them whatsoever. I think we have to depend. This is too serious. It has something that's potentially so dangerous to our standard of living that we have to step forward. We can't wait for these bozos to come to the rescue, because there's no indication whatsoever that they're going to do anything to help us. We have to help ourselves.
You mentioned there along the way that people will rise to using silver for ordinary transactions because it's an honest money. It's an honest currency. We are seeing a movement among the states, not at the federal level so much, but at the movement among the states, bringing out legal tender laws for gold and silver. It was 14 states, then it was 17, 19. It's getting to be like 22 states that are seriously looking at this. And that if people go to soundmoneydefense.org or perhaps at the Mises Institute, there may be current information about that as well, as far as this movement among the states within the U.S. to establish, for the good of their people, the freedom and the right to choose to use sound, true, honest money, such as gold or silver. And if people want to do it right now, today, there's a link in the description of this video for Glint Pay, which is it looks like a MasterCard debit card, but when you use it, nobody knows at the checkout that you're actually using grams of gold that are in your account to pay for your purchases, so that you're instead of having your dollars sitting in your checking account being stolen for the inflation, you got grams of gold sitting in your Glint Pay account in a vault in Zurich, Switzerland, and you're maybe holding their value or even increasing in value in between the times that you're spending a little bit of it along the way.
Yeah, the one of our students at the Institute actually started that Sound Money Defense League. I'm very proud of his work. He's been incredibly productive with almost no resources available to him. And he's hit, a live vein in the American public, and he's done some great work. J.P. Cortez, and I think this is what really, I haven't written about this yet, but I'll give you the punchline, which is, I think what's going to force the politicians' hands is when the states that have already woken up to the problem, the states like Utah and Idaho and Florida, Texas and so forth, once those states start threatening to secede from the Union of the United States, that's when they're going to wake up and start doing something about it. either as a result of outright secession or just the threat of secession. But I think instead of getting to utter destruction of our society through hyperinflation, that the states are going to come to the rescue by threatening secession from the United States.
That's major talk about a major event. You've written recently, or is about to get published, an article about black swans, which you can explain to us why these sort of seminal or page-turning or tectonic plate-shifting events can come apparently out of nowhere, and what even might have been completely unexpected or unpredicted can suddenly be the thing that the straw that breaks the camel's back, and all of a sudden you're going off in a new direction. What do you see about that, and what do you think people should be perhaps prepared for?
Well, I before the black swan, it was Keynesian animal spirits that supposedly swayed the economy into booms and busts. Black swans gave us a different level of explanation that something real happened that kicked things into a boom or kicked things into a bust. But what I tried to show in that article, that talk, was that it really just represents what's going on fundamentally in the economy. And then once I described that, I started talking about some of the things that are potentially black swans that are existing right now. Certainly the artificial intelligence situation where they're spending money hand over fist, not really knowing where they're going, and that without any completed plans for the electricity and the data centers and the investment and all the rest, without any real roadmap for customers and revenues and so forth. But there's a lot of other things. I mean, we're living in an everything bubble where the trillions of dollars that the Fed has created has really set off bubbles in most areas of the economy. Traditionally, real estate is a big one. We've been concerned about commercial real estate markets. So that's certainly a possibility. Cryptocurrency has been, has gone from 10,000 to 110,000. We don't really understand that all that well. I mean, the American public, the people who have been purchasing cryptocurrency, they don't even really understand it. I've talked to many people who have invested in cryptocurrency and they have no idea of what it is or why it's valuable. They just own it. So, that's a classic type of area where black swans develop, black swans emerge. And, it's a great news story and it kicks off a crisis of some sort. But ultimately, it's still the Fed behind the curtain that's been increasing the money supply and lowering interest rates and creating the fundamental reasons for these booms and busts. So, that there's a lot of potential black swans out there, and I go through a lot of them in the podcast tomorrow.
We'll put a link to that podcast in the description of this video for those who want to follow up on that. And for people who want to find out more about what they can learn at the Mises Institute, how should they get connected with that and your work?
Well, we have one of the largest economic web pages in the world. It's mises.org. We have tons of articles. We have like 5 podcasts. We publish books and newsletters. We have tons of video and audio lectures and information sources. As I said, we publish books. We sell books that are discounted price on everything that's important in the economy. So you really, like with your program, your viewers need to go to Mises.org and get informed, stay informed. You can subscribe for free. There's no, we don't charge for any of our services other than the books and other than our conferences. And we have conferences dedicated to students and professors and the general public. So please come and check us out. I'm sure you'll be glad you did. Ludwig von Mises was the major champion over the last 200 years for the gold standard. And he knew all the reasons why the gold standard was so important for peace and prosperity and increases in the standard of living. And, and that's what we're dedicated to here.
About 3 times or so during our whole talk today, you mentioned unless people take this action, unless they, like early movers, move out of harm's way, give everyone a clear idea of what you're thinking that is available for people who want to take action. I mean, it's never too late to do what you can do now. We don't have the past, we have today. What is it that people, in your view, can and should do to take care and protect their families' futures?
When you look at the alternatives, government bonds are not going to be a very good alternative. I think real estate is overblown at this point and artificially inflated. And I don't trust cryptocurrency at these levels. So the only real, tangible, reliable asset, I think, is gold and silver, hard assets in general. But I think the easiest and thing that anybody can independently do without relying on anybody else except yourself is to get on the phone, get in contact with a reputable dealer, get some input from other people who know what they're doing in this market, get some recommendations from other people, and start getting on your own personal gold standard, gold or silver standard, and start diversifying away from anything that's dollar denominated.
Well, we've been so grateful. Mark Thornton from the Mises Institute, thank you for coming back on Liberty and Finance and reminding us of all the resources that are available there. We're grateful for your presence here. We'll make sure that it's not as long as it has been until the next time we have you back on.
My pleasure, Dunagun.